Have a good word for you today to start out your week. I want to talk about the prize of Lordship, of Jesus being the Lord of our lives. It was something that was kind of intimidating to me when I first got saved. The thought of Lordship today, it's the most wonderful thing I can possibly think of, is for Jesus to be the Lord of our lives, and there's a prize. When Jesus is the Lord of your life, there's a huge prize, very practical, everyday practical prize. And this is Isaiah 9, beginning with verse 6, it's talking about Jesus. It says, "Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end." Well, first of all, it talks about the coming of Jesus and all these roles that he plays, Eternal Father, Mighty God, Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace, all those kind of things like that. And he is. He's everything to us. And so it says, of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Here's the point of this message. The more of God's government you get, the more peace you get. Now, I experienced this in my own life. I got saved at 19 years old, and I genuinely got saved. I mean, I lost all my friends. I started going to church, reading my Bible. I had a personal relationship with Jesus, and I didn't know him very well. But even though, you can get saved and make Jesus the Lord of your life, there's the event of salvation, which just happens one time. I mean, you get saved, you don't have to get saved again. It's a one-time issue, but there's the process of salvation where you begin to make Jesus Lord over more of your life than before. For example, when I got married and when I got saved a week before we got married. I was saved and I made Jesus the Lord of my life, but he wasn't the Lord of my marriage for several years. He wasn't the Lord of my money for several years. And he wasn't the Lord of my mouth for several years. Well, we almost divorced. We were broke. I had tremendous anxiety in my life. I struggled. I was a nervous person, had constant anxiety. Well, my wife and I almost divorced. And I told her to leave, to get out of the house, because we had been fighting so much. And that night is when the Lord broke through my heart. My wife had been praying for me because I was the problem in our marriage. And my wife had been praying for me. And, I repented to my wife. I repented to God. And I made Jesus the Lord of my marriage. Well, we have a marriage ministry now that reaches all over the world, and we've helped millions of people from what the Lord did from us. But I'm just telling you, we have peace in our marriage. We did not have peace in our marriage because Jesus wasn't the Lord of our marriage. When Jesus became the Lord of our marriage, we had peace in our marriage. We didn't have peace in our finances. We were broke. We went to church one Sunday, and the preacher was preaching on giving, and it made me sick. I made $600 a month. We lived hand to mouth. And we lived in government-sponsored housing. We were so broke. And we went to church one Sunday, and the preacher was preaching on giving. I hated his message. I was never going to go back to that church again. And we got home, and Karen said that she liked the message and wanted to give $40 to the church. I just almost passed out. It just made me sick. Well, she started giving to the church. And I didn't believe in it. I had a hard heart. But I saw the Lord begin to do things for us that had never happened for us before. And after a couple of 2 or 3 months of her giving, we started giving. I met God as my Father through giving. And I tell people that I didn't know that God knew my name. I didn't know that God knew where we lived. But I'll tell you, when we started giving, it was undeniable that the Lord was in our home. I say this to people, living against God's will when Jesus isn't the Lord of your life, it's like rowing a canoe against the current. It's very hard to do. You don't make much progress. And the minute you stop rowing, you start losing ground. But when you're living according to God's will, it's like rowing a canoe with the current. It's much easier. You make a lot of progress. And even when you're not rowing, you're making up ground. And Karen flipped the boat around. When she submitted our finances to Jesus and she began to give, everything in our life changed. And the anxiety and just the spirit of poverty was on us became blessing and peace. My mouth. I had a very bad mouth before I got saved. I had a horribly vulgar mouth. But even after I got saved, I was just a smart aleck. I was verbally abusive to Karen when I got mad at her. My mouth was not submitted to the Lord. I did so much damage with my mouth. In fact, the night that we almost divorced, when I went and repented to Karen, and I said to her, I'm sorry for the way I've treated you. The first thing she said is, your mouth You've said things to me, Jimmy, that have devastated me. And what? My mouth was not submitted, but I submitted my mouth to the Lord. And let me say, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if my mouth were not submitted to the Lord. And the Lord cannot use a person who doesn't have a submitted mouth, because when your mouth is not submitted, you're just going to do a lot of damage in your relationships, wherever you go. The Proverbs 18 says the power of death and life is in our mouth. And and the next verse says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So before you are going to succeed in marriage, before you're going to succeed as a parent or in relationships in life, you got to get this thing under control. This thing, it has to be submitted. So here's what I'm saying. The more Jesus is Lord of your life, the more peace you'll have. It's just a simple principle. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. They go together, his government and his peace. Anxiety, nervousness, just fear, all those kinds of things, they're the product of not being submitted. And I'm not questioning your salvation. I know you love Jesus, and I know you're saved, and you're on your way to heaven. But here's what I'm asking you today. Is Jesus the Lord of every area of your life? Is there an area of your life that you haven't submitted to Jesus? In other words, something that there's not peace in? And, you just come to the Lord today and say, Lord, I receive you as my eternal Father, my mighty God, my, everlasting Counselor, Prince of Peace. I want you in my life, and I want you to be the Lord of my marriage. I'm going to pray before I make decisions, my money, my mouth, my relationships, my priorities, my destiny, everything in my life, Lord, I bring it to you. And here's what I promise you. The prize of Lordship is peace. The more submitted you are to Jesus, the more of his peace you'll have. And some of you are listening to this, and I'm preaching to the choir, you've got tremendous peace in your life, and Jesus is Lord. But some of you are like I was. There's an area or areas of your life, you love Jesus, he's the Lord of your life, you got saved, but you have not let him have the government of your life. We're sheep. We can't bear burdens. We can't navigate, and we can't defend ourselves. We need a shepherd. That's one of the most common analogies in the Bible of our relationship with God. God sees us as sheep, okay? We are dependent on a shepherd. We desperately need God in our lives. And I promise you, whoever comes to him will not be disappointed. That's what the Bible says. When you make Jesus Lord of your life, he will bless you with, first of all, his incredible guidance, but also his wonderful peace. God bless you.